The Bioceuticals Integrative Medicine Awards showcase the outstanding talent we have in the Australian complementary medicine profession. Nominations are now open for the 2018 BEMA Awards. For more information and to book your ticket to the gala dinner, visit bioceuticals.com.au/BIMA. This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining me on the line today again is Beth Bundy, who's a qualified naturopath of over 18 years, specialising in integrative and functional medicine. She worked previously as technical consultant with PathLab, one of Australia's original functional pathology companies, and currently trains healthcare practitioners nationally as clinical consultant at NutriPath Integrative Pathology Services, where she's in high demand as an engaging and definitely informing speaker. And she also works as a functional medicine practitioner in a busy and highly successful integrative medical practice. Beth, welcome back to FX Medicine. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I think my frequent flyer FX Medicine points must be finally getting me a flight to Sydney.
Good luck.
Eventually.
Good luck with that. you might get from Tullamarine to Avalon. That's for our listeners. That's the two airports in Melbourne. Beth, today we're going to be talking about mercury testing and specifically about a try test. Now, this is something I need a little bit of explaining, but I think we need to go back a little bit. When often we think of mercury poisoning, we think of underdeveloped countries, we think of these disastrous industrial accidents like Minamata Bay, which happened in Japan. So just how big an issue is mercury poisoning or mercury toxicity in Australia?
I thought you might ask me a kind of techo question, so I bought my stats. All right, so interesting you mentioned the Minamata disaster because in 2013, actually, I think it was about 160 countries got together for the Minamata Convention, which actually was an international treaty designed to protect humans from themselves, from the emissions and releases of mercury that they had created. So, the whole world's realising that there's a problem with mercury. And I've got some notes here from the Australian Department of Environment and Energy have put together a final regulation impact statement as of the end of 2016. And I state here, in Australia, an estimated 18 tonnes of mercury is emitted into the air or released to land or water every year. So on a per capita basis, Australia's mercury pollution is high at approximately double the global average.
Wow.
Wow. And, I know, that was like, oh dear. Now, much of that comes from metal manufacturing, so such as gold, the coal industry, and especially in making electricity, which I was surprised. Then the other one is from fungicide spraying. It's a product called Shirtan, and they spray it on sugarcane, and it's got mercury in it. Yeah. So Queenslanders, be on the lookout for this. And also, you've got to remember now our new whiz-bang energy-efficient fluorescent light bulbs are mercury. And, of course, they end up in landfill, or you've got to be careful if you break them, right?
I think that's the issue, And is it fluoro or the 50 watters?
Now you're getting all blokey on me. It's those, those curly-whirly ones that now you can fit into your... Yeah. And also in this impact statement, they say that mercury is internationally mobile, which actually means that the emissions and releases anywhere in the world can harm Australians and vice versa.
The thing that interests me is the health advice given to pregnant women regarding fish, and they vacillate.
Well, now they are, because that is, clearly a problem, as is really the second major source is silver mercury dental amalgams, or, the silver fillings that we know of, which also contain tin and copper, apparently. Now, interestingly, the amalgams mercury amalgams have been phased out in several countries in Europe, but still widely used in the USA and many other countries. And the N. Haynes study, they did a risk analysis data from the N. Haynes, revealing that the amalgams were a major source of mercury, and that the risk analysis showed that mercury in urine, feces, breath, saliva, blood, kidney, liver, brain, and pituitary gland increases with each filling you have.
Wow.
So you're compounding, depending on how many of those things you've got in your mouth. And the other thing I found was even the manufacturer of the amalgam says, and I am quoting this, the use of amalgam is contraindicated in proximal contact to dissimilar metal restorations. So basically, if you've got gold in your mouth, don't put a filling next to it. In patients with severe renal deficiency, which will make sense to us a bit later, when I talk about how it all works. In patients with known allergies, and also children under 6, and in expectant mothers. So, it's clear that it's a problem. And also, if they really want to get, freaked out, because you want to see something a little bit more real and slightly scary, is you can Google a YouTube video of a tooth off-gassing mercury, that you can actually see the mercury vapour coming out. And so this is especially important for those with fillings. Every time you chew and have a hot beverage, it's going to help release that mercury vapour. So listeners just have to Google mercury vapour video. Right. And I'll put the link in for the show notes. Yeah?
There was also a very good YouTube, call it a video, but it's got some animation in there. It was very well done by University of Calgary. That was over a decade ago. So indeed, that was nearly 2 decades ago. So it's 17 odd years ago that they put that out. So
about the filling?
Yeah, and what it does, what mercury does when it's mobilised and what the risks are. So it's not like it's a new issue. It's just been denied, that's all.
Oh, completely. And because of this Minamata Convention, of course, the government put it out there to relevant parties who would be interested in what they had to say about it before we ratified anything, which, by the way, Australia hasn't signed yet, so that's interesting. And so what was promising when I was looking up a little bit more on this is that many Australian dentists do seem to be no longer using the dental amalgam.
Yes.
However, the Australian Dentist Association does not see the need to ban mercury, as it is a cost-effective option. The other thing about the amalgams is, which of course the Dental Association says, well, it's not just us, of course, but also you've got to think about when you drop off this mortal coil and you're popped in the ground or popped in the what's the thing? The
furnace.
Incinerator.
Yep.
54% of the mercury from your teeth comes via crematoria.
Right.
Yeah.
Wowee.
Yeah. So don't stand too close to, when you're sending people off.
Gosh.
I actually remember at one of the symposiums, Dr. Joseph Pizzorno, who's, one of the modern fathers of natural medicine, he was commenting that his mercury levels were elevated and he couldn't understand because he didn't have any fillings and he didn't eat seafood. So then he was determining that he must have been exposed via winds from industrial sectors in China blowing across to him on the west coast of America. Or maybe he stood near a lot of crematoriums in Seattle, I don't know. But, that again is talking about the mobile aspect of the mercury floating all around us.
Wow.
And another way is skin lightening, so cosmetics. And so those skin lightening creams that you can use, the mercury, a bit like old-fashioned, they used to put lead on their face in the Renaissance. So you've got to be very careful if you're using these products where you're getting them from. And some medications, ear, eye, nose drops, ointments have mercury in them. And the other biggie is your fish.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and that's because the mercury is converted to methyl mercury and consumed by us in our fish. Big fish are worse, so things like your shark or your flake, your swordfish, your orange roughies, your ling, your barramundi, tunas, your big tunas. I remember Dr. Chris Shade, who does a lot about mercury and detoxing, he said salmon and sardines are okay. And however, though the farmed fish have less mercury, they are much higher in other pollutants. So we're kind of, we might have to ban fish at some stage. I don't know. And shellfish, yes, they have less mercury, but apparently they are higher in cadmium and arsenic. So I
pick
don't
your
know. We
poison.
might have to pick your poison. And now, interestingly, Chris mentions that it's the mercury in the fish is not in the fat, right? So we know a lot of toxins are in the fat, but he says it's actually in the proteins, and this is mainly due to cysteine, which is the amino acid.
Yeah.
And it has this sulfhydryl group that has a high affinity for mercury. So what happens is the methyl mercury sticks to it, and then you eat it. And when you're digesting the proteins, you're hydrolyzing that into the amino acids. And then you have this free cysteine that's got a mercury stuck to it.
Right.
Yeah. So apparently what happens is because it looks to our body, this looks a lot like methionine.
Oh.
And with molecular mimicry, we then absorb this through our amino acid transporters in the gut. And so this is why the mercury from fish, you're looking at about a 95% absorption rate because of that fact. So that's, a little bit disturbing.
Yeah.
And also the other things that bind mercury stronger than sulfhydryl groups are the selenol groups, which is about selenium. Yeah. Right. So it's important to ensure we have enough selenium in the diet to help, get that mercury out, kind of, connected and out.
Yep.
And it's because if we don't have enough, then we're more susceptible to the mercury toxicity within us.
Yeah. So, of course, with regards to fish, there's the issue of bioconcentration. And, I think the thing is, forgive me if this is boring to listeners. I just hope somebody out there maybe hasn't heard of this term or isn't au fait with it. But the whole concept is that one fish doesn't just absorb a little bit of mercury and then gets caught. They have to live, they have to breathe, they have to grow. And during that time, they're eating. So they're not eating one meal, but, multiple meals, each of which contains a tiny bit of mercury. Then that fish gets preyed upon by a bigger fish. So then all of the mercury and other toxins that are in that fish get absorbed into that bigger fish. But that bigger fish doesn't eat just that meal. It eats multiple meals. And then that bigger fish is eaten by an even bigger fish. And that fish, again, eats multiple meals, each of which have these toxins. That's called bioconcentration.
Yeah, which I guess that's the thing is like a big worry is the shark.
That's right.
When we eat flake, because that's one of the biggest fish and that's all it eats.
Yeah. I just found it interesting that people, they don't seem cognizant of the way that bioconcentration happens.
It's layer upon layer upon layer.
Layer upon layer and multiple meals. Women particularly will not use one skin lightening treatment or cosmetics. They'll use them every single day. So it's this compounding, this compounding effect. And then you team with that some issue with poor chelation or poor biotransformation and clearance out of the body, and then you've got a pool that's happening, haven't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the hard, and that's what kind of makes the hardest thing is to actually determine if mercury is the patient's problem.
Yes,
because it can mimic like mercury toxicity. Versus poisoning, so that's kind of differentiation too you need to be mindful of is that long-term chronic accumulation becomes toxic, and it can mimic all sorts of diseases, and most of the lists that you'll find on Google are more related to mercury poisoning.
So let's talk about that. What are the major sort of signs and symptoms? And one of my issues is when would you suspect or be suspicious of mercury toxicity as opposed to any other of the myriad of causes of these symptoms? So can we go into that?
Well, this is the trouble, is that they are kind of non-specific and varied with the chronic toxicity. So you could look at things like the nervous system is one of the main targets of mercury. So, if your patient's irritable, they're talking about memory loss or, brain fog, insomnia, depression, anxiety, tingling of the extremities or slight tremors, a disturbed sense of smell or taste, and they might talk about a metallic taste, burning sensations or numbness, pain, headaches, fatigue. There's question marks about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's being, mercury being involved in that. And mercury is also known to stimulate the NMDA receptor and therefore can cause elevated glutamate levels, which then can cause those sort of neuro issues. So I had a patient recently who came to see me, mid-40s, highly anxious, was also smoking because she was anxious and it made her feel better, even though we did discuss that it does make you more anxious. But she was coming to me saying, I'm so anxious, and on examination, you could tell she was this like rabbit in the headlights sort of person. And then she was telling me about scalp numbness, and she goes, my scalp feels numb, and I have this funny taste in my mouth, and my tongue burns, and I get these like little tingly bits in my body, and got this funny part on my leg, and I was just going, yeah. So I was like, yeah. And then I just kind of went, how many fillings have you got, love? And she said, heaps. And I said, like, how many? Open your mouth. And we counted 10. And I said, do you think could we go down this pathway? And so in this instance, I actually, because it was wholly and solely in her mouth, and as per usual, money was an issue, I did a saliva metal test where they chew and then they spit, and they can do that. And mercury came off scale.
Wow. So
the next test we are doing on her is the mercury test.
Gotcha.
But that was a kind of it wasn't really obvious. It was just these weird symptoms that I don't see a lot of people kind of having numb scalp. And I even talked to the chiropractor that works with us, and I said, is this some sort of neurological thing if they're talking about this? And he was like, not off the top of my head. So the mercury thing, that was something I could connect to her neuro sort of symptoms, But otherwise, they could have not been related to that at all. It could have been something else. The other thing that you have to consider is immune system. So if someone's getting chronic or frequent viral or fungal infections, Chris Shade talks about candida being very relatable to mercury fillings. And I guess that would make sense. It's in your mouth and then you're swallowing that and it's in your gut. Skin conditions, and I have definitely seen that with IV chelation. If you go too hard and fast, people's skin reacts. It comes out via their skin. So that's a strong one. Right. The other thing we need to remember is metals. As a general rule, metals are endocrine disruptors. And mercury has been associated with thyroid issues, so particularly Hashimoto's, and some infertility and adrenal issues. The gut is a big thing because you swallow it, so irritable bowel symptoms. Again, I had another patient who he was really concerned because he was pooing 14 times a day.
Gosh.
Which would be concerning. He couldn't, he had to plan his travels everywhere. He had to know where all the public toilets were on his travels because of his bowels. He had been checked out. He didn't have ulcerative colitis. He didn't have Crohn's. He had no macro reason for this. He went Googling and came to me saying, look, this is my situation. I think it's mercury. We tested him, did a urine test, and yes, again, his mercury was off scale. He got treated with detoxification and chelation, and I saw him about 4 or 5 months later, and I said, how's it going? How's the visits to the, it is. And he just put up 2 fingers and just went twice a day. And I was like, wow. It was just such an irritant to his gut and bowel that was causing this diarrhea. So, even all those things, all those symptoms I've commented on, they go, oh, well, they could be anything, Beth. They could be dysbiosis. They could be, So it is tricky. So you really need to do a thorough case history to determine if there's been exposure. So you need to ask about fillings. You need to ask about, did they play with the insides of the old thermometers when they were kids, which I've had people say, yeah, I used to play with that. It was cool because, liquid mercury. For all of those, mercury kind of rolls around like
little
liquid
balls,
ball bearings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thankfully, our science teacher, Mr. Visser, was very aware of the toxicity of mercury and was paranoid about it.
That's where your paranoia comes from, love.
But I've got to say he was very respectful of safety, and I always admire him for that. He was a good teacher. He was a great teacher.
That's good. Obviously, dentists. We've tested a lot of dentists with the test since it's come to Australia. And also, I would be suspicious, as I mentioned, for those in Queensland that are dealing with sugarcane farmers.
Absolutely.
Knowing about this fungicide.
Didn't know about that one.
No, well, neither had I. So at least, those are really obvious. And then otherwise, perhaps you would consider general heavy metal testing if you've got little to go on, which you can do via hair or urine. And then, depending on what you see in that, you may consider further mercury specifically.
Right.
But still, I want everyone, all the listeners, to remember that all tests have their limitations of awesomeness. And, for example, measuring in the blood, unless they're overtly toxic, it won't show up because the body's going to put it through the blood and then to the kidneys and the gut and either get rid of it or stick it in your fatty tissue and your brain.
And this, to me, answers, in part at least, the denial. If it's not there, it's not there. What are you looking at? It's not there. We don't see it. We don't have a toxicity issue. Why? Because we did a blood test. Well, it's not there in the blood. So relevant testing has got to be employed in all cases.
Yes, and we need to remember to use it as an indication rather than an absolute.
Good.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So what sort of tests are available? You said hair, urine, serum, and then you've got the test.
And the test. So which looks at blood, hair, and urine.
Right.
Surprise, there's the 3. So, but if I can just back up and actually talk about the different forms of mercury, because we're just going, mercury.
Yeah.
But you need to know there's different forms because that matters. So we have the elemental mercury, which is found in your amalgam, and it can be found in a liquid and a gas form, which is the vapour, and approximately 80% of that can be absorbed via the lung, right, via inhalation. Then you have your inorganic mercury, which is formed by the oxidation of elemental mercury, and this can happen in the blood and the mouth, right, with your fillings, and is swallowed, and then obviously goes through your gut and detoxification elimination channels, but there can be a problem with that. Methyl mercury, which is the one that's found in the fish, and as I mentioned, is highly absorbable in the gut because it attaches to the cystine. And this methyl mercury readily crosses into the blood-brain barrier. So this is the problem with it getting into your brain.
Yep.
And then it can also demethylate to form back to inorganic mercury, which can be a problem for those over-methylators, okay, because they're demethylating constantly and upregulating that. And then the last form of mercury is ethyl mercury, and this is the one that's found in vaccination, still in some vaccinations, cosmetics, so this is the skin lightening creams and some other cosmetics, and medication, so your ear, eye, nose drops, and good old mercurochrome, if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember the eye, yep.
Mum used to paint on you, yeah.
Yep.
Don't be doing that to your children, please.
It was taken off the market years ago.
Yeah, so, and as we mentioned, that mercury in the blood, unless acute, is not going to come up because most lab detection limits, so most of the machines, they can't read it until the limit is too high. They can't read down low. And they measure for total mercury. So they measure for all of those lumped in a bag together. It doesn't differentiate, or what they call speciation. They don't specify or tell you which species of mercury you're dealing with. And that's kind of where the tri-test comes in. So what you need to know is in blood, what you're reading in blood is predominantly methyl mercury, right? So, and you get only a little bit of inorganic. In the hair, you're mainly reading methyl mercury. So this is the fish mercury, yeah? So when you do a hair analysis of, we're just talking mercury today, you're going to get a picture of what their dietary intake is, more so.
Right.
With urine, you will get more about the inorganic mercury and a little bit of methyl. And when you do provoked urine or a challenge with an IV chelating agent, which is things like DMPS, DMSA or EDTA, you will pull both methyl or fish mercury and inorganic amalgam mercury out. In the stool, we can also measure. You'll get both mercuries. And the saliva, you're predominantly getting that mercury from the amalgams. Yeah, so that's the inorganic mercury. So this is why Dr. Chris Shade, who you've interviewed previously on the podcast, created the mercury tri-test, because it measures the blood, hair and urine. So we can more specify which mercury, and we can see how they're working together.
Right, and tailor treatment.
Yeah. And you can see whether it is mainly the food, so you need to cut that out, or amalgams or what have you. And so what you get from that is it's a graphic representation. You get a little pretty picture of a graph with the coloured bars, so you can determine to what degree, and it goes, it measures at a smaller quantity and then can go up to, scary levels if someone is scary. And I have seen a few of these test results thus far, and it's quite interesting. And it's interesting about detoxification pathways, because I've seen quite a few dentist results, and there's a few dentists that I've gone, hey, you need to, watch what you're doing with mercury, and others that are really quite, mobilising and detoxing very well. So it is quite helpful. And so what we're doing when we're doing the blood versus hair, it's showing how the bodies can mobilise the mercury more related to their liver processes. And when we're looking at that inorganic mercury in blood against urine, we can then see how they're excreting relating to their kidney elimination.
Right.
You see, so we get an idea about the kidney and liver / gut, because this affects, mercury will affect your elimination channels, because it kind of like blocks it up or clogs it up, or, it gets overloaded.
Yeah. So I guess one of my issues is, like if you've got a steady outflowing, this steady drip, if you like, of excretion of mercury in the kidneys or through the kidneys and the liver, then that's fine. But then you go and detox and liberate mercury from tissues, from organs around the body. You've now got a dump of a load
Mm-hmm.
of that, and that's got to be handled. That's a real area of problem, that causes problems or might cause problems if you don't handle it properly. So
Absolutely.
So what's the
Because
best
it'll
way?
move to one or the other. You
Yeah.
know? So, like, if you've got gut, so you use gut and kidneys to excrete, yeah, via the liver to the gut and then the kidneys. But if you've got, say, gut inflammation, like our mad poor man, then because you're not moving it through the intestine properly, you're going to have to then shunt it more to the kidneys and increase your kidney load. And then you can get retention of these toxins because the kidneys then start packing up as well. Now, I don't mean renal failure, but I mean that they're not being adequately able to eliminate these toxins.
It'll just recirculate, yeah.
Absolutely. Hepatic recirculation is a real problem because it's how they come through. They'll all come via the gut or kidney, through the lungs, and then they're going to accumulate, as you mentioned, in liver, kidney, brain, what have you. So you do need to get this out. Like you said, the slow drip. So hard and fast is not the way to do this. You really want to start with draining or the drainage organs first. So you want to make sure that your patient's kidney, liver, and lymphatics are working adequately. And now we can do this via herbs, homeopathics, liposomal nutrients, and so rather than going straight to the detox, we would talk about this being our pre-tox or our pre-detox.
Yeah.
So you might look at things like diuretics for the kidneys, bitters and cholagogues for the liver. So you can use things like globe artichoke, beplurum, gentian, and then what we call in the herbal world blood cleansers for your lymphatics, such as cleavers, burdock, yellow dock. Movement, exercise, massage is good for your lymphatics. And looking at fibres and gentle laxatives for your gut, because obviously you've got to make sure people are pooing, just not excessively. And don't forget the skin is also an elimination channel. So as I said, I've seen reactions to chelation coming out through the skin. The far infrared saunas can be beneficial to help people kind of sweat things out, providing they wash it straight off. The good old Epsom salt bath. Okay, it's very drawing. Okay. Yeah, it's very drawing. And another big thing I need to mention too is sometimes we don't know where the toxicity is coming from, where the gut inflammation is coming from or what have you. So you need to determine whether you're dealing with an infection such as parasitic infection or, say, the SIBO, the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And you may have to treat that first before you look at detoxing, because if you've got, say, SIBO where the gut's really having a major issue, and then you go, hey, let's detox your mercury fillings, you've got gut problems already.
Yeah, that's right.
So, because it's not necessarily the toxicity that's the issue, it's the toxin load on that person. Because what you can cope with and what I can cope with might be two different. You can deal with playing with you can't play with the thermometers, but you can deal with eating more fish than I can per se before, it's a toxic level for me and it's affecting me. And this is going to relate to the patient's detoxification capabilities, what the inflammation they've got going on, what their genetic detoxification capabilities are, because we know a lot more about genetic detox pathways now too. We look at intestinal binders, so things like chlorella, but you need lots of it to really get an adequate detox. Activated charcoals, your zeolites, your clays. You can use cholestyramine if you're prescribing doctor, which is an old cholesterol medication. And this is to bind up anything floating about so we minimise that enterohepatic reintoxication. Then phytonutrients, such as your green tea and ellagic acid from pomegranate, sulfur compounds, so your cruciferous veggies, alpha-lipoic acid is very helpful. If patients have a trouble with sulfur, like with those vegetables, you can look at supplementing with molybdenum. That helps with the sulfur. Glutathione is a must, right? Or supplementing with precursors. The liposomal form of glutathione is definitely a better option than standard oral if you're not using intravenous.
Yep.
NAC, N-acetylcysteine, and whey protein can offer the precursors to glutathione because glutathione and alpha-lipoic are better at detoxing mercury specifically. But NAC can be used, but you would need to use mega doses versus you would use the liposomal glut.
Yum, yum.
You can use also bitters for your drainage support, that things that have your burdock, your gentian, again, dandelion, etc. And this, your pre-tox that we talked about would probably go for, numerous weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, because you've really got to make sure they're eliminating, okay. Then you can detox. And it's important to not just go. You need to cycle this therapy to give the body a rest. So depending on their strength of detoxification capabilities, you would do, say, 5 days on of your therapy and then give them 2 days off. And you might do this for a month or two. Then you can up-ramp that to 10 days on therapy and 4 days off if the patient's handling it. So you've got to really watch your patient because you need to know that detoxification effects, so if they go, I'm feeling nauseous, I've got a skin rash, I've got a headache, you don't go, excellent, you're detoxing fabulously. No, you're not. Even Chris Shea talks about him doing his own detox and causing himself all sorts of troubles because he decided to just go hard and fast. And then he couldn't even remember what his name was. So
it's one of the biggest lessons I've learned is this heroic dosing. I've learnt those lessons the hard way as well.
Yeah, you've got to be careful, and this is where the binders are important too, because as you're starting to detox, you need to bind them and help get them out of the system, not float back around again. So, and we instigate things like selenium and vitamin C and CoQ10 and B12, which you can also get in liposomal form to assist with the energy that's required to keep this detoxification going. And on the off days, you need to support people with their activated Bs and vitamin C and adrenal tonics because especially if someone's chronically ill, you really need to determine whether, A, you're going to detox them and at what level. You really need to go slow with small doses and work your way up because you can really make them, really sick and have horrible detox pathways. And definitely the glutathione needs to be used quite a bit throughout so they don't then retox themselves, later.
Yep.
And antioxidants are important in that aspect too.
Just as a quick wrap-up question, Beth, what sort of red flags do you have to be aware of? I know we've mentioned a few, but what sort of real ringing in the ears should you be listening to when your patient, comes back on the second or third visit whilst going through these detox procedures? Are there any sort of signs and symptoms that you might go, we need to retest or need to look at what's happening?
Well, definitely major detox or Herx, what we would call Herxheimer reactions, so major skin rashes, major nausea, major headaches, or neurological symptoms. So they're starting to, get kind of, weirded out in the brain or highly anxious or things like that. These are not good. It does not mean your detox is working. It means you are really hurting your patient. You need to, abort. And a rescue mission is needed. You need to really woo it up. So
what sort of things would you use as a rescue? The binders or?
The binders and really just upregulating those channels. Right. And you just got to slow down.
Yep.
You know, the other thing is if you're detoxing someone and they've still got lots of amalgams in their mouth, you are chasing your tail a little bit. And it's very important that so with my lady who's got the 10 fillings and all these symptoms and has come up very positive, I have certainly recommended, and I do not do this very often, that she consider having them removed because it is a very costly process because you have to go to a dentist who is
specialises
very well versed in that, and very safe. The skin thing, I have seen the skin thing happen because I work in a clinic where we do IV chelation, so we use those chelating agents. And if someone hasn't had their drainage channels dealt with sufficiently, then I have seen that they really do feel quite sick, and they can go backwards. So instead of them saying, "Oh, I feel so much better," they say to you, "I feel so much worse." That is not the way to do it. I have another lady who's so sensitive. She's my first guinea pig on the liposomal detoxification process, and she has done excellently because she's gone slowly and titrated up to how she's managed. She's had no symptoms, whereas when she was using an oral chelating agent, she was breaking open the capsule and using a bit of it that way.
Right.
She was reacting. So the gentle way can be really great for those super sensitive. They have genetically variations that cause their, which might be something if someone's really ill, you need to maybe look at their gene detoxification to see whether they can cope with it. The other thing is also your methylation SNPs, so your methylation genetic variations can kind of show. So what will happen is if someone's got a lot of methylation issues genetically, when you get their tri test, they'll look like they don't have any mercury in their system. But Chris Shade says it is impossible not to have any mercury in your system. Even if you don't have fillings, as we mentioned, we're exposed environmentally to it. So he says that if there's such low levels, you have to suspect a methylation issue. And so you would investigate that and treat that, not go, "Oh, you're fine. You have no mercury."
This sort of thing is obviously so involved. I think it requires us to look at this in more detail with specific patients and see what their stories what story evolved whilst they're undergoing therapy. So, Beth, I got to thank you so much for at least opening that Pandora's box of the Mercury Tritest. But it is, look, it's
can
this.
Of fish.
Yeah, that's right. This is so involved that we're really just touching the surface by doing one podcast on this. So, I'd love to have you back and delve further into this if that's okay with you.
Yeah, cool. And I'm sorry if I blew people's minds a little bit.
Well, it does.
It is a lot.
It does. And it's something that I think we need to be really respectful of when we are detoxing something like this, because it's not something that you can just sweep under the carpet. It's a metal. It won't disintegrate. It's a metal. It retains. It remains. So,
and it is serious, yeah. And it's a serious issue, and I think sometimes we use the word detox a little bit kind of...
flippantly.
A bit flippantly, yeah.
So well done, and thank you so much for taking us through the issues and the opportunities, I guess, for the Mercury Tritest and indeed other tests.
Cool. Always a pleasure in speaking with you and to the listeners, and we'll talk again soon.
Done. This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. If you're loving our FX Medicine podcasts, please don't forget to share us with your colleagues, family and friends.